Hello, and thank you for joining us in the salon. I'm Adam Smith. I'm a program director for Dementia Researcher, and I'm delighted to be hosting today's gathering on the topic of options for after your PhD. These weekly sessions hopefully bring a fresh approach to webinars. We start with a 30-minute live stream, which includes some thought-provoking, provocative, hopefully, and informative talks from two great speakers, so no pressure on our speakers who give their take on this topic. We have a little chat after between us, and then the last 30 minutes you'll see some, hopefully this week, it didn't work last week, you'll see some music and some slides rotating in the background while our guests and myself will join you in the chat, and they'll take your questions and you can share your thoughts on this topic as well, and we'll have a discussion. And then what happens is this recording will be available, so if you're watching this on catch up, thanks for joining, and we'll summarize the conversation that happened in the chat using some AI summary tools and pin that against the recording. But that's enough for me. Let's get on with some introductions. My two speakers today. I just realized I didn't check with Cassandra how to pronounce her name beforehand. So we have Mikolaj Pawlak, and we have Cassandra Dinius.
That's great.
That close enough? Cassandra Dinius. Mikolaj is a neurologist who has moved from the US to Poland, and well, I'm guessing Poland, US, Poland, but we'll hear more about
That's right.
Your chat, and has experience as a neurologist and is in neuroimaging and is clinically interested in stroke, MS, and cognitive impairment. Cassandra has also spanned two continents, having completed your PhD in Southern Illinois, then moved to Ireland, back to the States, and then back to Ireland again. I think I'm pinning together this, but why am I doing this? Where she's now involved in work on brain health, patient and public involvement, and on clinical trials as well. So thank you very much both for taking time out of your Wednesday to join us, to join us. Let me quickly set the scene, and then I'm going to shut up. According to a survey by Nature, 44% of PhD graduates in life sciences continue into postdoc positions, which means that somewhere 56% of PhDs go somewhere else. Now, that could be into a related field, but the simple fact of this is we don't know. In the last couple of years, there have been many career talks coming up in the schedule. In fact, I'd be surprised if there isn't one at the AIC in a few weeks' time, which talk about what you can do with a PhD, about different career paths, different options, highlighting that there are many options that don't necessarily involve continuing in research or being a scientist. At the same time, though, we have funders like the Alzheimer's Society who are setting themselves key goals for their funding to say it's not about how many PhD students they fund, but about what those PhD students do next, with a key performance metric for them being, do they stay in science? Which, of course, it's then, if we're going to do that, of course, we need to rethink perhaps some of these careers, but we'll talk about that. So what do you do? The days of standard career paths and next steps are long gone. New doctors have a range of paths to consider now. Options include pursuing a postdoc, further specializing, entering into biotech or pharma if you're in some of the sciences, or to work on new treatments or non-profits or maybe policy making. How do you decide? Let's see what our speakers have to say about that. We also didn't talk about who would like to go first. I'm completely failed in my preparation today. Cassandra, would you like to go first?
I'm happy to, sure.
Okay, we're gonna Mikolaj and I are going to turn our cameras and microphones off, and we'll let you share your screen, and it's over to you.
Okay. Thanks so much for the introduction and for the invitation as well. I think you should be able to see my slides there now. So I have a dear friend who ended up in therapeutics and pharma. And he described the PhD as a degree in management and troubleshooting and logistics. So as Adam said, there's many things you can do with a PhD, but part of that path is figuring out what it is you want to use, which of those skills you want to use each day. Now, I will admit this isn't the most practical talk that I'm going to give. It's really just how I've navigated my own path. I felt very fixated on getting my PhD. I was so focused on that finish line that I didn't really know how to feel or what to do after I crossed it. So I'll talk through a little bit about the choices I made along the way. I think it's always worth asking yourself and checking in whether your priorities, your values, or your circumstances have changed since you set those career goals. I think we are dedicated scientists and dedicated researchers, so we can set a goal and keep after it with our dedication and our tenacity. But it can also be very valuable to reflect on this as a process. So if those priorities and values haven't changed, no, that's good to know. That's something positive to reflect on. Keep going in the same direction you were. Now, I'll talk through some of the things in my life that changed on my path. So I would have said yes to this many times. And maybe this presentation will be for you then, as I talk through what that looked like for me. So I considered myself destined to be an academic. I was very well experienced in teaching. I was studying cognitive aging, looking at attention and affect and modifiable risk factors for dementia, as well as non-pharmacological interventions. I had this goal. I had a roadmap of how to get there. It was all planned out. And my priorities at that time, when I signed up for the degree and started undertaking that process, my priorities were I wanted to learn, I wanted to grow, I wanted to get that degree, and I wanted to be employed. That's what I was looking for. Now, I graduated in May of 2020, and some of you history buffs out there might be thinking, wait a second, that was 2 months into a global pandemic, so it was not the best time to be on the job market. And as you can see there, my third priority was to be employed. So at the time, there was a job available in government, and I took that job. And I worked there for several months, and I hated it. There was no flexibility. It was like you clock in at 8 and you're leaving at 5. And I didn't like being at a desk. I liked getting out and doing stuff. And so I found myself quite bored. There were lots of office politics to navigate. And that was very different than the academic system and the academic politics I was used to. And I also felt for myself there wasn't enough rigor. So it wasn't meeting the needs that I had besides being employed. So I learned a bit about myself in the government job. And I decided that I wanted to take the next step of being a postdoc. I wanted to prove to myself that I could get a postdoc. I applied all over and I couldn't get a postdoc. Now, this was during pandemic times, but that was really tough. That was deflating for me to go through that process. And that's when the doubt started to set in and the dread came. And I started telling my husband, I regretted my degree. It was too specialized. What was I thinking putting all this time into something that just put me down a narrow path? And I will say I married a non-academic, which is maybe silly on my part, but love is love. And he earned more in his first job out of his bachelor's than I make now. So we had loads of differences. He's got lots of stability in his job. He can work at one thing consistently over his career and just dig in and get good at that one thing. His peers are off buying houses and having kids. And here I was saying, okay, I want to go and work as a postdoc, which is a temporary position. Now, at this time, my husband ended up getting a new job. And that's when we moved countries. And that matched my priorities. I was looking for growth. I wanted enrichment. I wanted a bit of adventure. So we went ahead and we made that move to Ireland. And when I came to Ireland, I got a postdoc. In fact, I got 2. And the pros and cons were kind of the same there. I was always learning. Lots of growth. It fed that need I have for knowledge and curiosity. But I also felt like I couldn't just dig in and get good at one thing because there were constantly new things coming at me that I had to get good at. It was also very competitive. So at this point, I'm in a new country. I've entered a new decade of my life, and I'm getting new challenges in my work. There's maybe a bit too much growth, a little bit too much adventure. And around this time, my dad also passed away from dementia. So my priorities here had shifted. My priorities now, I was wanting stability. I wanted something predictable. What job am I going to have in 12 months? I didn't want contract work. I also started wanting to feel like I was really skilled at something, like I was an expert at one thing. And I also started to wonder, how is the work I'm doing having an impact on people like my dad? Is there really an impact? So I'm not trying to give you a tour of my CV. I'm just talking about my path. So I've been a lecturer in academia, a data manager in government, a postdoc in non-pharmacological interventions and neuroimaging. I was a postdoc in research that was aimed at policy change. And now I'm doing translational work and public involvement, where I'm embedded at both a hospital and a charity. And like Adam said, I'm doing investigator-led clinical trials. So I suppose what I want to end on is just to say that a PhD opens many more doors than it closes, despite what I once thought when I had that sense of dread. It actually opens many, many doors. And in fact, sometimes you can feel a bit spoiled for choice, or at least I did, and that made me feel overwhelmed. Now, I know as researchers and scientists, we're driven to find answers. That's the field we're in, but there's probably no right answer with what you do after your PhD. I encourage you to follow your passion, allow things to unfold, and it doesn't feel like work every day if you wake up with a sense of purpose and you're feeling keen to work on problems that you enjoy. So for me, I just work on getting better each day. I try to trust myself, and I try to trust that options will come and that I feel free to explore those. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant.
That was brilliant. And
I love how brave you've been to make those transitions from those different roles. There was another stat which I haven't written down, which is when I was preparing for this discussion, that depending on where in the world you are, only 2 to 3% of people who have a PhD are actually unemployed. So whilst it might not feel necessarily, you can, that thought process you had that, oh my God, why did I'm so niche that it's not necessarily useful. I think simply having a PhD, even if you don't continue to pursue that to postdoc and things, is clearly makes you employable to different roles, because you do kind of collect up these skills along the way, from project management to being able to concentrate, write papers and do different things. Thank you so much, Cassandra. We'll chat more at the end. I'm gonna allow Mikolaj to share your screen and to give your talk now. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you are seeing my slides. And now
we can.
In the presenter mode, what to do after PhD. Yep. It's a very good question. The problem that I have is that I had to recall a number of memories, some of them pleasant, some of them not, while I was doing PhD. So doing PhD might be quite painful and time-consuming process, but you are destined to finish it someday. And it's good that you prepare for what will happen afterwards, because it might not be something that you were anticipating or expecting. So I start with whys. Just ask yourself why you are doing PhD. It's mostly because you are interested or good at solving a specific problem. Why a given topic is the topic of your PhD? Is it because it was available, or this is something you want to spend the rest of your life on? And this is really a serious problem. What will happen next? the data on what happens to PhDs is complex, but the general understanding is that there's a global overproduction of PhDs. And it has its own positives and negatives. So the long-term plan, I think, is the most important thing. So world is changing and the plans are changing too. And I feel like the Red Queen advice on, running very fast to stay in the same place is the best description of what happens to people after PhD and when they are considering postdoc. So my way of running to stay in the same place was to switch from Poland to University of Pennsylvania and start doing something which is really outside of my primary specialty, which is neurology. I went into imaging, and I spent great 4 years on fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania. So the important thing that you consider, particularly when you're looking at postdoc, is that you have to be able to have good tools. And those good tools will be useful wherever you go. That's why, for example, I advise people to learn stuff that takes usually more than a year to master, and use the software that is open source, which means that you can use it in industry as well as in academia, and learn broad stuff like image analysis, teaching, MRI or image acquisition, ultrasound. This is stuff that can get you far, because these are broad techniques, and they can be kind of customized to very specific problem if need arise. The other thing is that the people in academia are quite unusual, right? So most of those experts are just waiting to answer your question. You just have to have a very good question. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, you don't get overwhelming response, but those who do respond, they care about you and they will help you. And this is something that I experienced, like, for example, when I was planning on my first visit to Philadelphia, I sent letters regarding fellowship and some opportunities to a number of institutions around. And I got only one answer from Anjan Chatterjee from University of Pennsylvania. And this is how my trip to US started. And I got to know people who later were leading the grant I was on as a postdoc. The important thing in kind of preparing for a job market is that you have to be aware that everything moves, and it moves sometimes very fast. So new skills, new methods, new way of thinking about the problem, and happy coincidences are all over the place. Just to give you an idea, the person that was my PhD student, he started with language processing, and now he's working on application of large language models in drug development for a large pharmaceutical company. So the good PhD and good postdoc prepares you for something like this, because they're doing more research than a lot of universities, particularly the teaching universities, do. So if you really are into research, learn the skills, learn the tools, and be open to opportunities. The institutions are changing, right? And my impression is that this talk was not really about the institutions, so I'll skip that. And as far as the opportunities go, the getting out of your comfort zone is very important. Like, you really have to learn stuff, because if you won't do it, then who will? And the approach to problem solving as a job is that you have to work in a good team. people who also ask good questions. And in the end, the problem is that it's really difficult to predict your productivity. Like in working on software, there's this book, Mythical Man Month, like what can you do in a month? And the reality is that it's hard to predict, and it's still a problem, even though that book has been written in 1976. The research will be going on, and you want to be a part of it, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Listening to you talk about how you moved across to that was really good, by the way. I really enjoyed that. How you moved across to the States reminded me of a blog I wrote, and it's quite a while now, back in 2021, about how to write successful cold emails, which kind of talks back to this idea of, particularly in the States, I find more so than in the UK. I think there's people find their next job in the UK. Sure, I mean, there may be positions come up within the same lab, but jobs get advertised. There's very much a process for that. But in the States, I think particularly is where I've seen people advertise jobs just on Twitter, and then you try and find an official listing or job description, and they're not there. It's like, hey, I'm looking for some postdocs, email me. I think whilst not everybody likes social media, and perhaps if you're a social media fan, you might not be watching this because you might not have even heard about it. But I think they're definitely, in the States particularly, that's a way to look for roles. So I've got questions for you both that I prepared in advance before I'd heard your talk, so they might not entirely be relevant. I'm going to come to Cassandra first of all. So you've worked in the US and in Ireland. How has that international experience influenced you? Because you didn't deliberately move for work. You moved for love, right? I mean, you moved.
Yeah.
You moved for love.
I know, silly. Yeah.
What advice would you have for anybody else who, whatever their reasons, are thinking that their next step is going to be in another country? How did you prepare?
I think this used to be kind of standard, that people would kind of need to travel for work to gain that experience on their CV. It was sort of expected a postdoc might be in a different country. Now I think it's not as expected, maybe, but I still see a ton of value in the experience. You see how a different culture approaches a similar question. You see how different people work at that type of question as well. And I think it broadens your horizons and scope, which then lets you add to your tool belt, if you will, as far as the different approaches you have when you come to work. So one of the most practical examples of that for me would be the way that I hold meetings now compared to in the States. In the States, you show up 10 minutes early. You've got an agenda. Sometimes that agenda is down to the minute of what needs to be covered. You're in, you're out. This is what we need to say. You move on. Here, it's much more about building community and rapport. So you show up maybe a few minutes late. That's grand. No worries. Let's have a cup of tea. We talk about what else might be going on. And you're building these relationships. And that's a skill that if I do end up back in the States, I'll absolutely take with me. So I think that building that different skill set and approaching problems in a different way can only enrich you as a researcher.
And you both experienced that culture change then, in so much as that also counts, like I just said before I asked the question about job hunting and things as well, doesn't it? In that different parts of the world have different approaches to how you're gonna find that job. So I know while we're here, we're supposed to be talking about all the different options, but I suppose if one of the options that you've decided you're going to pursue is to go and look in another country, I think having a conversation with somebody who's already based there to talk about things like how people are finding their next role is quite important. And of course, big plug here, the Dementia Researcher Communities app is a great place for you to do that, because we have a career section and it's global. And so if you want to talk to somebody who's on the same level as you, or somebody who's perhaps progressed a little bit further in their career, you can use our app to find people, and it breaks it down in that community, connecting to where in the world they are, what career stage they're in, their research field. So hopefully you can find people to talk to. And as the community grows, once we have our official launch later this month, it will help. Next question. Mikolaj, you've transitioned between clinical and research as well, which I think is an interesting one, because certainly in the UK, lots of clinical fellowships talk about the difficulty in getting themselves a full-time job in research when they're clinical, or going what the transition is to go back. How did you decide to do that as a clinician? Because you're already got a job, right?
Right. I think that there are two problems connected to that. One thing is if you are entitled to, a special treatment, if you are a clinician, I encounter that a lot, and I don't think it's a good idea. In other words, you have to know your methods well, and that means that, you have to put more effort. You are a clinician on top of that, but, that doesn't make you, excuse for learning the craft. And when I was learning the craft, I wasn't really doing this for a reason. I mean, like, image processing is something that used to be a big field, and now it's exploding. So the problem is that you have to learn the craft, and you have to be good at something that kind of goes outside of the clinical care. And I can think of a number of ways you can approach that, but definitely one of the most important experiences, I was working with software developers, and they have a very different mindset. I mean, like, just to give you an idea, like in clinical realm, the order of authors is something that's almost sacred. In software development, order of authors is either alphabetic or random. And, that just shows a huge change in culture.
Yeah, I've worked with IT, well, in building this app and websites, and in my years at Department of Health and in the NHS, I've worked with different IT companies on delivering large projects, and I completely agree. It's an entirely different approach. But also, as well, I know people who finished their PhD who've then gone to work for tech companies in project management and things, because they've got these skills. They can think a little bit differently, about how to take some rigor and about different research methodologies and things, and apply those to programs and projects, and those skills are important. I think also we haven't talked about this, and I think another option that people don't necessarily consider, which is this going down the innovation route. So Sam Moxon, one of our bloggers, is a fundamental scientist who look at 3D printing biocells, and recently they've spun out a company from the university to create, because they've come up with some new ideas and some new technologies. And it was through the process of their doing this work and developing these techniques that they realized that was something that could be marketed, could be made into a product that could sell. And charities like Alzheimer's Society in the UK and I think Alzheimer's Association in the US do have these kind of innovation grants where you can apply to get some money to take time out from your research career to try and think how you could develop this intervention, this service, or this new discovery you've made to make it marketable and consumer. So that's another option that people can consider. We've only got, in fact, actually, we've only got no time left. We should be moving into the chat now to talk with you. So audience, if you're ready, get your discussion point, your questions for our guests ready, and also be ready to share your own thoughts, because this is the whole point of the salon, is that we'll share ideas and bring into this your own experience as well. But before I do that, I've got one last question, which is, if you could, so hypothetical situation, PhD student is 6 months away from finishing. They're doing the final write-up phase. They haven't got a job yet for afterwards. They're starting to worry about exactly when they should start. Well, there's two questions that they're thinking is, when should I start looking for my next job? Is it too early now? Because, you know, the jobs I'm looking for want people to start straight away. When is the right time to start thinking about your next career stage? And nextly, what would be your single biggest piece of advice from your experience that they should take on board to help find that next role? Cassandra, you go first.
Big questions. I suppose I've struggled with this myself working in postdoc roles. There's an end date of when I will no longer be employed, and I know I need to start thinking about what my next steps are. What am I applying to? And the way that I've managed that is I start looking probably 6 months ahead, and I start applying maybe 3 months ahead, and to have very honest, transparent conversations with your PI and your lab. And they can help steer and guide you on that as well. So that way everybody knows what you're up to. The biggest piece of advice to take away, I suppose for me, I wish I would have heard that there are plenty of options, and that they will continue to develop, because 10 years ago, the role I'm in with public and patient involvement probably wouldn't have justified a full-time dedicated role. So things are evolving, and stay tuned in and follow those trends and see what might come forward.
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, from my perspective, there are two aspects. One aspect is if you are going to do university-based research that's funded by the NIH, for example, get in touch with organizations that are kind of collecting all those possible and available positions, like National Postdoctoral Association, the organization at UPenn is Biomedical Postdoctoral Council, and they will help you essentially to find something that kind of suits your needs, or at least you will have a feel like who is doing something that might be interesting for you at a given place. So usually you would start like a year ahead and kind of get in touch with people who are doing research at a given place to kind of get familiar how you can be useful for them. It worked for me. It might work for you. And the other option is, if you are considering industry, they can hire you tomorrow. So like applying to industry 6 months ahead, I mean, like, we don't know what we'll be doing, next week, what to speak, what you'll finish, get back to us when you'll be available. And those are the two options. The teaching positions are usually quite differently assigned, and that depends on the place where you want to go. So I will skip that.
Thank you very much. While I was listening to you there, I was thinking I'm going to add one myself, which is we published a blog about a week ago from Rebecca Williams, who's a PhD student in Cambridge, who talked about that kind of imposter syndrome and never quite feeling good enough. And it does concern me that if you're coming out of your PhD and you're thinking, oh my God, this has been hard, or I've not done as well as I thought I would do, and it's been tough, I think is to don't let those feelings of imposter syndrome fester, because that can severely impact on what you think you are capable of in your next position. I think remaining positive and being as ambitious as you possibly can. Mentors are great to help you potentially recognize your potential, but I think be ambitious. I think if you are wanting to work in a lab, or you're wanting to work for somebody and you think that's somebody I'd love to work for, they're doing research that I like. I wrote a piece on this, which I'll share in the chat afterwards, but I think somebody I spoke to recently became their kind of mini stalker. I don't mean they sat outside their house and got binoculars in their back garden or anything. But what they did was they followed them on social media. They ticked that little bell to get alerts every time that person shared something. They literally liked and retweeted everything that person shared on social media. So even if that person doesn't ever visit you, they become aware of you. It's hard to not become aware of somebody when they are liking and sharing everything you do. And they found that person through looking at papers. They found people who had written papers that they were interested in. Then they sent them an email. And my tips on sending a cold email are be concise and short. Make your request of what you're sending them for clear and actionable. Avoid being self-indulgent. Don't give them 6 paragraphs about you and your career. Explain why you chose them. A little bit of flattery, I think, goes a long way. I really enjoyed your paper. Your research is amazing. Make it okay for them to say no and ask if they could recommend somebody else to talk to. But try and get those conversations in. Try and say, hey, it would be great to chat. I'd like your advice on the career stage. And as for when to apply, it's getting trickier. I think if it's a grant application you're looking for, we know you've got to look 12 months, 6 months ahead. Even if you put an application, I was talking to somebody recently who said they weren't going to apply for a grant this time because they didn't feel they were ready. I was saying, well, do you know what? I wouldn't let that put you off, because so many people don't get it the first time around. Actually, they get it the second time. So put something in fully expecting you're not going to get it, but you'll get feedback, you'll get experience of the process. And so also as well, you can say this is the second time applying, because some funders really do prefer to fund people the second time, not the first time. So don't be afraid to do that, particularly with something like the Race Against Dementia grants that want people at those very earliest stages. Okay, we're going to shut up now. Thank you so much to the incredible Cassandra and the amazing Mikolaj. You've been brilliant. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. But for now, thank you so much again for joining us, and we'll see you in the chat. Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, Mikolaj.
Thank you.